professionally led companies. This is a topic which we are all interesting because it covers every gamut of your management today. And we have got three outstanding speakers who will be sharing their insights. Mr. Anand Kripalu, Mr. Raghavendra Ravi, and Mr. N.K. Prasad, who will be introduced by Mr. Balraman. Now, it's indeed my proud privilege to welcome Mr. Balraman. Before that, I also take opportunity to welcome all the viewers who are watching this program live on our social media portal, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and also our own webcast. Do join us. And as usual, if you have any question, please send it through a WhatsApp or put it in a chat box. And the distinguished panelists will be more than happy to address your concern. Let me have the privilege of welcoming Mr. Balraman, past president and former MD of Ponds India. And he's a veteran Ponds and also been a great supporter of MMA's cause. He's an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, former MD of Ponds and former export director of Hindustan Lever, a number of other companies too. And he was also a former chairman of CANS and chairman of the Food Design and Development Institute. Currently, he's on the board of director of Delphi TVS and India Nippon Electrical Limited. And he was a past president of MMA for not one session, it's two things which very rarely happens in MMA. And very warm welcome to Mr. Balraman. May now request you to please introduce the speakers and also set the context for the discussion this evening. Over to you, Mr. Balraman.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So this is the 23rd event under the Listen to Ponds Veterans series under the auspices of Madras Management Association web portal. In the 1950s and 60s, if you talk of a doctor, the doctor was invariably a family doctor. For any problem you have, you go to him. He knew you and your family from everyone's childhood till their mature age. So he knew the person's health history, life history, habits, tendencies, and so on. Over time, this has changed. By the time we reached the year 2000, we had very many separate disciplines of medicine. Cardiology, hepatology, there is a doctor for each part of a person's anatomy. And the general physician is almost vanished. So as people started responding to very serious ailments of different parts of the body, the concept that a human being is an integrated physical being and the emotional being is somehow being missed. This has happened to us even in Hindustan Lever. We had worked both for Ponds and Hindustan Lever. Ponds was a professionally managed, really inclined company. Hindustan Lever, as you all know, is as professional as it can get. Each function is managed to its utmost complexity with great skill and integrated. If one were to think that the two are totally different, that again would not be true. Because if you look at very large professionally managed global companies in the world today, every one of them started several years ago as an entrepreneurial venture, whether it is H.J. Heinz, Procter & Gamble, Chesbrough Ponds, Unilever, what have you. So companies start with an entrepreneurial effort. And over time, I have calculated in the past, because it interested me a lot, about 40 years later, approximately, companies are forced, assuming they keep on growing, and assuming that they become multinational, globalized, at about 40 years, the last of the entrepreneurs generation is no longer capable of running such a complex operation. So all businesses start entrepreneurial, they become professional. But in between, you would see a number of companies, like you say them in India, although they are growing in complexity, they continue to be led entrepreneurially. I mean, they have functional heads who are professional, but the top leadership and the board continues to be entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial management brings certain power, freedom to think, certain imagination, certain passion to business. I had a collaborator called Giorgio Foods in Pennsylvania, who's a mushroom grower, and he was an entrepreneurial person. He used to lament that he tied up with me. We are part of Hindustan Lever. He said, you are a very professional company. You want profits every quarter. You are not looking at the business 5 years hence. You are not willing to make a few losses in the first few years. So this was a complaint he had. So even very large professionally managed companies have this angst that they do not have a long-term vision and they do not have the option of missing a quarterly profit result. So there are pluses and minuses to entrepreneurial management and professional management. And apparently Raghavendra Ravi, who was an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, he teaches as a professor in several IIMs, Lucknow, Kanpur, Jodhpur, Jaipur, I do not know how many. And he said he has become an entrepreneur. He has become a very, very good consultant. He teaches as one of the lecturers in our 24-week course for MMA. And supporting him, but leading the discussion is Anand Kripalu. Anand Kripalu again is IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Calcutta graduate. He was also with Ponds, and he was with Hindustan Lever. Then he was with Mondelez, and he is now leading Diageo. A most interesting career. He has incredible things to share with us in terms of a viewpoint, experience, and I'm looking forward to listening to him in addition to Raghavendra Ravi. And N.K. Prasad, again, is from IIM Calcutta. And he was in Ponds. He led several projects entrepreneurially in a professionally managed company like Ponds. He was in the leather garments division. He was in the mushrooms division. And then he joined CAMS, which is an entrepreneurial venture, and which he took over to lead professionally. So we have a rich talent here, rich experience. I'm very eager to listen to him. Who is kicking off? Is it Anand?
Yes, Mr.
Anand, yes.
Yeah, Anand. Kick off. Welcome. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction, Mr. Balraman, and hello, everyone. Very good evening. And thank you, of course, Mr. Balraman, as always, and Group Captain, for inviting us to talk about today entrepreneurial management versus professional management and promoter-led companies versus professionally led companies. So I will be joined in this session, as you've just said, by our Raghavendra Ravi and Koteshwar Prasad, all of whom have had the opportunity to work in as well as observe how these different kinds of companies operate. Indeed, all of us have had some exposure to both, albeit each of us have it from different vantage points. And I hope that those different perspectives is what will make it interesting. The plan for this session is for each of us to share some personal experiences. So we want to keep this personal through our lens as much as possible. And then at the end, Ravi most likely will try and pull together a few principles or guidelines for both the entrepreneur amongst us or indeed the professional manager amongst us. Okay, and then we'll try and open this up for others to share their perspectives. And we have some people present today who have outstanding experiences in these areas across both these dimensions. So let me start a bit with my own experience. So I had worked for 3 decades in what you could probably call professionally run companies like Ponds and Levers, Cadbury, which became Kraft, which became Mondelez, before I arrived at USL, right? United Spirits Limited, or Diageo. You know, as I was putting these notes together, reflecting back, Mr. Balraman, you know, Ponds was a very interesting example of a professional company with a lot of entrepreneurial zeal. How else would a company that specialized, whose main business was talcum powder and creams, venture into leather, thermometers, mushrooms, tennis rackets, and so on, right? I mean, if you think back today, in an age of core competence and strategic focus, it is remarkable, I think, what we did in Ponds in terms of the kind of businesses we got into. And of course, there was a need for foreign exchange, and therefore, there was a reason why we pursued that. But also, I think a lot of the things that Ponds did at that time were very entrepreneurial. For instance, how we started hiring summer trainees and making permanent offers, or paying the highest on campus to get the best people. I mean, a lot of things that Ponds did was really ahead of its time. And a lot of that has already been discussed on past occasions. So today is not about that. But it was very much within the backdrop of professional multinational experience that I took on the USL job. And obviously, I'm going to be politically sensitive in what I speak about my experiences here, but I still hope it will bring out the nuggets that will be relevant for our discussion. Now, at the time that I started contemplating this role, both the companies in the UB group that operated in the Alcobev space were formidable. Dr. Malia, a second-generation promoter, had built on the legacy of his father, who was a somewhat understated entrepreneur. You didn't hear so much about Vittal Malia as you heard about Vijay Malia. USL in India alone had almost become the largest spirits company in the world in terms of volume, almost equal to what Diageo sold across 180 countries. So USL sold in India what Diageo sold in 180 countries in the world in terms of volume. USL had nearly 50% share by way of volumes of the Indian spirits market. And UBL, or United Breweries Limited, with the Kingfisher brand, had half the beer market in India. So for anyone to become the dominant player in both spirits and beer was absolutely no mean achievement whatsoever. For both these companies, the promoter was very much the brand ambassador and carried the image of the companies he promoted. At that time, the Alcobev industry in general had a questionable reputation, right? And everybody will have their own views and perception about how alcohol is marketed and sold in India. And people will have doubts about business practices and policies. At least that's how it seems from the outside for a lot of people who don't know the business from the inside. So it was with that I walked into the doors of USL on October 1, 2013, with that kind of perception in my mind and that image of the scale of that business. When I walked in, I saw a company with a massive operational and executional capability. A company that was obsessed with volume and obsessed with becoming the number one in the world. That was the mantra in the company. We are going to be number one in the world. A company with brands that we had all grown up on. Many of the brands that we used to drink in T88 Kalakshetra Colony. McDowell's number one, Royal Challenge Whiskey, Signature Whiskey, Bagpiper, Diplomat, Black Dog, and many, many, many more. I also saw a company that was street smart, where there were very few meetings. Most decisions were taken just by picking up the phone and calling one other person, and the decision is taken. Where decisions, even big ones, could be taken if one man wanted it. Like the purchase of a cricket team, which, if you ask me, is an enormous asset in a media dark market. And, very often I have wondered how a multinational company would respond if I and the local management put up a proposal to buy a cricket team in India. Right? How would the global bosses have responded to that proposal, right? And all of you know how most multinationals would respond to a proposal like that. They would have probably changed the CEO in the country. There was a quest for volumes at any cost, right? with the result that several brands had to be price repositioned downwards as they were unable to hold their value in the onslaught of newer competition that was coming in. So it was volume at any cost, and you didn't mind discounting your brands. Also, with the same objective of becoming number one, USL was formed by conducting huge M&A, and many would have heard of the acquisition of Shaw Wallace and the integration of Herbertsons and Phipsons and McDowell's into one company. And this created a monolith, but albeit a complex monolith of more than 100 brands, very often overlapping with each other, and 94 factories in India.
Wow.
Right? So it was a highly complex machine. It also had a lopsided overhead structure. As you know, one of the things with a lot of traditional promoters, they rarely ask people to go. Loyalty is everything. You have a paternalistic style of management. And, they never ask people to go. And one promoter once told me, they don't want anyone's bad omen, anyone's curse. In Hindi, kisi ki baddua nahi chahiye hame. Right? So we will not ask anyone to go. We may sideline them, but we will not ask them to leave. I also saw a company with a few smart people in that business, but generally very average people around me. And that was in sharp contrast to what I was used to seeing for 3 decades in the companies that I worked for. I found people here who had spent their life in this sector. Most people had done the same job for decades. I found people for 20 years, same job. And he joined as an assistant manager. He was now a vice president, but he was doing the same job. Right? Every year he got an increment. His salary went up. Right? So he got promoted optically in terms of designation, but he stayed doing the same thing. And their salaries generally were poor, much below any industry benchmark. There was no benchmarking done. And, alcohol at that time was a bit like Hotel California, the song, you can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. It was like that. Yeah, you could check into the sector, but you could never leave the sector. But you know what? Despite all that, they were loyal to the promoter. The promoter got enormous loyalty, which you don't get easily in professional companies. And, in fact, I must tell you, when I announced that Dr. Malia was stepping down as chairman in 2016, half the company felt miserable. Their eyes were moist. They were saddened that he was leaving the company. The company had largely men, right? A sharp contrast to today's mantra of diversity. The management committee of more than 20 people, this big boardroom that I walked into, didn't have a single woman. And the company couldn't attract people from outside the sector, because a lot of people from more, within quotes, blue-blooded sectors never wanted to join. And they certainly couldn't attract women to come and work in the alcohol sector. I also saw a huge lack of systems, lack of controls, lack of governance, at least the way we were used to it in the way we were brought up. Very few processes, even for critical functions like planning, innovation, human resources, there were hardly any processes. Things were people dependent rather than process or system dependent. So there was this person who had done this job for 20 years. He knew how it had to be done. Okay. You couldn't replace him because what he did was not chronicled anywhere. Right? You would lose everything when that person kind of left. In fact, the only powerful functions were sales and finance. Sales to get that number one in the world objective, and finance to control the money, right? But also, you could maneuver finance in the way you wanted. All others were relatively toothless in that company. Most other functions were toothless. There wasn't even a qualified lawyer on the rolls of a company of this scale that was so dependent on the understanding of the regulatory environment. There wasn't a lawyer in the company. The culture was hierarchical. The moment you walked in, people called you sir. And there were the classical symbols of seniority, like a reserved elevator. When I walked in the first day, they said, sir, that elevator is for you. And all the other elevators had big queues in front of me. There was one elevator with nobody in front. And I was told that that elevator is only reserved for a few people who worked in UB Tower in Bangalore. Senior people also had enormous paneled cabins and reserved parking, all based on your level in the organization. You know, you also realize when you walk into a company like this, that it is impossible for more than one person with a big ego to survive in a company like this. So apart from the promoter, there was hardly anyone else who had any stature, who had any say, or indeed any real power. But everyone looked up to the promoter as a benefactor. They almost revered the ground he walked on. He was a man with a larger-than-life image. And you know, he's a remarkable man. He had great vision, great ambition, great risk-taking ability, high intellect, huge charisma. But you know, he led the big thinking. Everyone else obeyed and executed. So you can see why Diageo wanted to buy this company. Because of its formidable position in one of the most exciting markets in the world. And honestly, if it weren't for the collapse of the airline, this transaction may never have happened, and I might never have told the story.
Very true.
Yeah. So after a decade-long wooing, Dr. Mallya was wooed for a decade. Diageo finally took control of this business on July 4, 2013, and I was brought in then a few months later. So what's happened after Diageo came in? So this is, I tried to paint a picture of what the company was like when I walked in. Well, after Diageo came in, everything that you would expect from a professional manager like me with 3 decades of experience in multinationals happened. Okay? We stated a vision that was, we must keep the best of the past while embracing the best of Diageo. So we said, we have to create an entity here that has the best of both. But what happened along the way? The first journey we embarked on was the journey of compliance. You cannot imagine how hard that was. We had to take many hard calls, and the whole mantra of not asking people to go changed very quickly. People got frightened when they saw people being asked to go. And suddenly the whole organization became hugely risk-averse. With that one journey of compliance, suddenly nobody wanted to take any decision. Nobody wanted to take any risk because, well, they felt their jobs depended on it. So the ability in the organization suddenly to take any kind of risk was hugely dented, and everyone started passing on everything above for approval. But compliance had to be done because without this, nothing else mattered, honestly, in terms of creating the backbone of the organization. Out of the 100, honestly, closer to 150 brands in the company, we chose 15. And as all multinationals do, you decided your focus brands, and we renovated those brands, made them more contemporary, more relevant for the younger generation, and made sure that we upgraded their offer and their imagery so that they could charge their rightful price in the market, so we didn't have to price discount. We also set up an innovation process and an innovation team. We transformed sales from volume, where you were measuring only the number of cases being shipped from the factories, to value, and changed the mindset of the sales force from push to pull. We halved the number of factories. So today there are 47 factories and we still haven't finished. And we halved the number of white-collar people in that company. We created a big muscle for cost savings and the elimination of waste, which we called productivity. We changed the way business is done in the industry, right? And I think my proudest legacy will be that we have proven that business can be done the right way in alcohol, and you can be an ethical marketer of alcohol. And we changed the way that we engage with the government and the industry engages with the government. We put in place systems, processes, and governance. The board was completely revamped. We integrated the cricket team and its brand assets much better with the mother brand of Royal Challenge Whisky and with that of the business. But I have to admit this, we are still unable to deliver the performance like all the other 7 teams which are promoter-owned. All the other 7 teams in IPL, apart from ours, which is professionally managed and multinational owned, are domestic promoter owned. We transformed the culture, more open, non-hierarchical, more inclusive, ability to attract people from the broader FMCG space. We stepped up the quality of talent, especially women, and we made a big difference in diversity and inclusion in the company. And finally, we enhanced the profitability and showed how share could be won strategically rather than through discounting and M&A alone. But we have lost some things along the way. The true spirit of being entrepreneurial and pioneering in what Dr. Mallya had built in that company. The speed of decision-making has seriously slowed. There's now lots of analysis, and I dare say paralysis as well sometimes. Lots of meetings and a lot of bureaucracy, so-called bureaucracy due to process intensity. So all that has creeped in these 7 odd years while we were trying to change the company. In some ways, we have become a victim of our ways of working and our reward systems that struggles to reward the entrepreneur and the risk taker in our business. Our annual targets, our KPIs, how we review performance, how the pyramid takes shape, how very often it is that one person who has not performed well who doesn't move forward rather than the people who do well. All of that. And that has been a challenge, by the way, in all the previous companies that I've worked in, particularly in Unilever and Cadbury as well. How do you create that entrepreneurial spirit? How do you make people less risk averse? Right? That is a challenge that I've seen there, and I see it here too. Now, what we have done, however, is we've used the crisis of COVID to address some of these issues. Suddenly, in the last 6 months, we had no choice. We suddenly became more focused. We started taking much faster decisions. You couldn't keep pulling 20 people into a meeting, right? We introduced much more flexi working. Engagement levels, despite being virtual, have never been higher. And I do feel today that some of those little bits have improved, but I don't think we're entrepreneurial and risk-taking as a culture in the company. So that's the USL story. I just want to touch upon a few other brief examples, just headlines from other companies that I have observed. And some I'll take the company where I think it's appropriate and some I won't. Jet Airways. Jet Airways was this brilliant airline and brilliant brand that made so many Indians proud. It was the promoter who created and built the airline with obsessive focus on delighting the customer. No cost was too much, nothing was too much if the customer really wanted it. At one time, he brought in a very senior, seasoned CEO from FMCG. In fact, one of the biggest senior Indian CEOs in a multinational company in FMCG. But you know what? The promoter could never let go. Within months, the CEO got frustrated because he spent his time sitting outside bank manager rooms looking for loans. And every morning he would get a chit from the promoter saying, this is what I want you to do today. And he told me he doesn't need a CEO, he needs a secretary. And he left, frustrated. The promoter, however, missed the opportunity to leverage the best of both. I've also seen companies that are promoter-driven becoming too professional. They suddenly start depending too much on people who are from professional backgrounds, and they lose the creative spark, their risk-taking ability. And while the founder stays, the founder's mentality is lost in the company. they become victims of the investors and the stock price. I have seen them finding it easier to do an M&A and buy something for 500 crores, leveraging their balance sheet, rather than build something from scratch, organically investing 50 crores a year for 10 years, which will impact your P&L. They find it easier to buy something for 500 crores one shot, rather than say, I will take a dent of 50 crores each year on my P&L and build something from scratch. I've also seen a promoter in a media company who was very clear why he is bringing in a professional. You know, he keeps high risk, judgmental and gut-related decisions like which movie to produce or which movie to invest in. He keeps that with himself. Okay? But he hands over processes, systems, controls, talent, performance management, etc., all to the professional manager that he hired. So this person, this promoter, was self-aware enough and had the ability to let go of what he felt he was not going to be good at. So what is clear is it's not about one or the other. For companies to sustain over longer periods of time, you need the right combination of both. It's not either or. The art is in getting that balance right and making both styles flourish in one company. And as we all know, that is easier said than done. Otherwise, we would not have been having this discussion today. So with that, I'm now going to hand over to Kotesh to talk about his experience in this space. Kotesh, over to you.
Well done, Anand.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Mr. Balraman. Thank you, Group Captain Vijay Kumar. Thank you, MMA and the attendees. I have had a little over 35 years of professional management experience. And during this period, I've had the opportunity to work with several entrepreneurs. This included suppliers and service providers to our group. This included P2P manufacturers, the principal-to-principal manufacturers of branded products, consumer products. This also included several entrepreneurs from international markets, especially the Western world, Germany, Italy, and the United States. And finally, I've had the opportunity to work in a first-generation entrepreneurial company, which eventually got transformed into a professionally managed and a respected public institution. So based on this experience, I will share with you my perspectives, my learnings on entrepreneurial style of management and the professional management. And I look forward to enlightening discussions after our session, receiving your points of view. Entrepreneurs, especially the successful entrepreneurs, I think are very, very special people. They are a very tiny percentage of the population. And in my opinion, they are actually the driving force for the national economy and even the society. These entrepreneurs bring a unique mindset of exploring the new, exploring unexplored, and taking on all the risks and the uncertainties associated with them, and charting out their own path towards success. And in doing so, they actually end up achieving huge amount of fulfillment, and they are in control of the destiny of their lives. Some of the qualities that I've seen among the entrepreneurs are, they're very energetic, creative, very passionate, committed. They are risk takers by nature, and they also have a huge amount of resilience, and they're persistent people. And most of the successful entrepreneurs, as they begin to build the organization, especially the successful ones, they recognize the need for what I think are the key pillars for any organization to sustain itself over long periods of time, which are in the form of values, culture, ethics, and integrity. And especially as the interest and accepted by the society. As the company becomes bigger,
Kotesh, because we lost you.
Okay. I said that most successful entrepreneurs, they realize the need for sustaining the business in the long term by building 4 pillars, which are values, culture, integrity, and ethics. When the enterprise becomes big, it is actually owned by several stakeholders, including the entire society itself. It's not just the equity ownership that I'm talking about, which may be held by the entrepreneur or his other investors, but the entire gamut of clients, customers, suppliers, employees, government, tax authorities, regulators, auditors, everybody becomes a stakeholder in the company. And in this phase of evolution, most of the successful entrepreneurs I have seen, they willingly induct professional management into the company, and they accept and imbibe creation of systems, processes, metrics, measurements, evaluation, human resource development, and several other governance practices. And this is common for most of the successful entrepreneurs that we have had opportunity to work with. I find that the key difference between the entrepreneurs and the professional managers are the following. And I think to an extent, it has got a bearing on how the individual enters an organization, in what role does he come in, and what is expected of him, and what is specified to him. So to that extent, the following are the key differences. The entrepreneurs are aptly described as the creators, but at the same time, the professional managers are able executors, and both are needed. The entrepreneurs initially and even during the course of the journey, they always seek success. For them, the success is their innovation, their product, their service must be accepted by the market. They must win clients. They must win market share. Actually, profit becomes a second priority or a byproduct for them. And it does not matter if quarter on quarter you did not have growth in profits as is expected of the professional managers in the current generation of management. On the other hand, by definition, a professional manager, when he enters a company, there is an expectation, and the goals that are set often have a linkage to the revenues and the profits. So therefore, the consequent behavior of the two categories, entrepreneurs and the professional managers. It is the entrepreneur who dreams and who brings path-breaking initiatives in the form of extremely innovative products and services, because he does not fear the failure. On the other hand, a professional manager's proclivity is to sustain the business, grow the business, and achieve the desired results by the board and shareholders and so on and so forth, and takes some calculated risks in terms of implementing incremental innovation. So that's a big difference between the professional manager and the entrepreneur. The other difference that I see is in the form of the focus of the entrepreneur and the professional manager in terms of engaging with the systems and processes and collective decision making, as compared to somewhat intuitive decision making that entrepreneurs tend to do. While I have described that the roles and orientation are distinct, every organization also requires efficiency and effectiveness. It is the entrepreneur who brings in effectiveness into the organization in terms of charting out the future course of the organization. What is relevant for the business, what product categories or services need to be offered to the market, and so on and so forth, which is where the entrepreneur is extremely effective. And the professional manager, on the other hand, has enormous amount of focus on efficiencies of the organization in terms of achieving goals with the optimal utilization of the resources. Having said this, both the roles are extremely important and they are not completely discrete for every organization. And just as the entrepreneur needs to imbibe professional management practices like systems, processes, etc., the professional manager equally needs to make sure that the entrepreneurial role in the form of innovation and creating new products and services is given equal amount of priority. I have seen that many successful organizations, the entrepreneurs continue to lead the company, and they have a number of professional managers supporting them. And there are many, many business groups in India who are known for this. I have also had the experience firsthand where we have seen the entrepreneur completely segregating the management and the ownership to an extent that the entrepreneur actually stepped out and we had the professional management taking the company forward. This is a kind of a rare kind of occurrence. And in such transitions, to my mind, the following factors would help. If the entrepreneur and the professional manager has had a reasonable length of working together in the company, they would tend to arrive at a shared vision for the company. They would have an aligned purpose for the company, and they would broadly agree in terms of the strategy, medium and long-term goals for the company. And what is important is after the transition, the professional manager must take cognizance of the fact that the entrepreneur is no longer in the day-to-day business, and that role has got to be somewhat filled either by himself, or he needs to have a set of people who drive the innovation and creativity in the organization. Equally, it is important for the entrepreneur who steps out of the organization to periodically monitor the results, not interfere with the day-to-day management, not have informal systems of reporting and stuff like that, but be available as a wise counsel, especially when the management seeks out their point of view. Now I want to share with you a few key learnings through some real-life experiences that I've had, both in India as well as overseas. Unlike the professional managers who are generally managing within the constraints of the organization and achieving optimal results, the entrepreneurs do not have any limitations of constraints. And they invariably try to find a way forward in terms of achieving their goals, even though the constraints sometimes look daunting. Here I will share the example of a financial services company that I've been part of. This business is a highly regulated business, and it involves transacting and processing trillions of rupees of value, which means that it has to have very high degree of consistency and very high degree of accuracy as well, and a huge amount of risk management as a part of this. During the capital market cycle, when we had a heady cycle in the not so long time ago, this company was experiencing a 50% organic growth year on year with the existing set of clients. That itself was a stretch for the organization. And at the same time, the company was presented with an opportunity to achieve inorganic growth on top of it. And when I say inorganic growth, this was in the form of acquiring clients who had legacy business in the same industry, but who were willing to come into this company, adopting this company as a service provider. And it so happened that there were a number of such clients in quick succession who wanted to do this, all in a matter of one financial year. This was an extremely daunting task from a professional management perspective, because you can't afford to have any dilution in the service standards and delivery to your existing clients. And on top of that, by inducting the new clients, you need to make sure that you are meeting their expectations. The entrepreneurial culture in this company and the entrepreneurial leadership in this company, the company decided to take on this daunting task of inorganic acquisition as well. And yes, it took a few weeks of struggle for the company to make sure that there is no dilution to the existing clients, and also the new clients were served well to their expectations. And in a matter of little over 3 years, the company's business metrics grew almost 12 times, 1200%. This kind of unlimited approach is something that entrepreneurs bring to the organization, which is very important for the professional managers to sort of keep in mind. The second example that I would like to give is the entrepreneurs actually breed what is known as a family culture. Now, in a family culture, unlike the professional culture that we have seen in the multinational companies that we've been part of, the roles, responsibilities, and the activities are not very clearly defined. And as a result of this, there is a certain degree of informality in terms of the way people work. And I go back to the same financial services business that I mentioned earlier. This business has got a large part of the activity, which is to serve the securities market on a day-to-day basis, serving the investors and various other constituents. And occasionally the clients issue what is known as the public issues when they come up with new securities and offer to the market. And these public issues also require a very high degree of financial accuracy in processing. They need to be processed within a timeline which is specified by the regulators. And in these public issues, it's extremely difficult to predict what kind of volumes you can expect. And most of the clients invariably fail in predicting such volumes. And since these are very discrete activities, no organization, no service provider can keep bench strength to be able to manage this. And on occasion, we have experienced that punched up such public issues by several clients resulted in the organization having to induct 60%. It is 60% additional resources in terms of the back office strength that this company would have. And these resources are required for a period of, a few weeks. And within few weeks, the entire issue would get processed. And after that, there is no real job left for these people. And the company can only set aside a few people from the regular business to be able to monitor and manage this additional activity. Mind you, in such situations, I can't even recall exactly how it happened, but everybody sort of came together. People inducted almost 1,500 temporary employees in a short period of time through a variety of vendors, and actually achieved in terms of completing the processing of all this to the satisfaction of the clients as well as the regulators, because there was actually a fear at some point in time whether all this could be processed or not. This is another example in terms of how entrepreneurial culture in the organization sometimes results in people performing extraordinarily well. This financial services company, another example I want to share with you. Like any company, it's got a highly documented processes and systems and controls. It is needed in order to achieve consistent outcomes. And in a situation, the entrepreneurial culture enabled the employees to feel empowered to sort of find their own way in an extreme adverse kind of a situation. All of you would recall in Chennai, 2015, there were floods, which were probably the worst in the last 100 years. And these floods froze the entire city of Chennai. The entire public utilities were, shut. Airports, postal system, courier system, power, even the telecom was shut. And we have had a set of employees, roughly about 20% of employees, who were housed near the office itself, and they were working on a sort of 24/7 basis, sleeping in the nearby hotels and so on and so forth. And these people had to sort of reinvent the processes in order to ensure business continuity, because the business of this company is extremely critical for the capital markets and especially the money markets. And they continued and delivered to the surprise of the clients as well as the regulators. In fact, it has subsequently been documented as a case study, and it is under publication by Sage Business Cases. I have also worked with some Italian companies, and we used to supply very famous brands, leather garments, very high quality leather garments, which used to be priced upwards of $1,000. And I'm talking about this was in mid-90s, long time ago. And I used to work with many fashion houses near Florence and Venice in Italy. And producing these high quality garments, you procure leather and you process the leather. And ultimately you end up using only 80% of the leather, 85% of the leather. And especially in the winter season, they would create, these large fashionable parkas with animal furs and so on and so forth. And at the end of the season, you're left with a lot of leather. And I used to see the real Italian creativity and the entrepreneurial zeal to make sure that they get the best out of the buck that they spend and the resource utilization. They'll come up with very beautifully designed vests for men and women, which require short pieces of leather, or they come with specially designed garments with strips of leather. And it is amazing to see these kind of sales that take place in the spring, summer seasons. This is another experience that I wanted to share with you. Finally, I want to share with you an example of an entrepreneurial approach taken by some of the professional management and professional organizations' employees, of which I was part. Late 1980s, several companies, including our own company, had set up farming mushrooms and canning mushrooms for the US market. There were plants set up in Chandigarh, Tamil Nadu, Hyderabad, Pune, various places. And these plants were supplying to various Western countries, including United States. And along with my team, we had begun experimenting whether the cultivation of button mushrooms needs to be done in a capital intensive fashion and whether it requires energy intensive cultivation. And we started questioning this, and we implemented a new format of cultivating the mushrooms, using the cool climates of the Nilgiris. And subsequently, people went a long distance in creating the base for producing these mushrooms, what is known as compost, in plain areas, and carting up the compost to the uphills, to the Nilgiris, and then cultivating the mushrooms. And several of my ex-management colleagues, as well as several employees, they joined with local entrepreneurs to set up these new plants. And today it is amazing to see that these button mushrooms are produced in a not so capital intensive format and without energy, especially the cultivation without energy. And nearly 30 tons of mushrooms are getting produced in Nilgiris. And this is another experience that I have had, where it's the other way around, where the professional management sort of migrated into the entrepreneurial role. So as I said earlier, I think the traits, roles, predispositions, and the responsibilities that an entrepreneur undertakes in an organization, as well as the professional manager, I think both are very relevant. Both are needed to a certain degree. And depending on the life cycle of the organization, life cycle of the business of the organization, I think it would be prudent for the organization to adopt a mix of both the styles. And that is something that I want to leave behind as a thought with all of you. And I would now invite Ravi to take on the further discussion and look forward to your queries and comments.
Thank you, Kotesh. Both Kotesh and Anand have done a great job in describing vividly the situation at both ends of the spectrum. And like what both of them said, I would invite all the audience to look at it as a continuum from the entrepreneurial management style to the professional management style. And it is not as if that they are discrete at all. So one of the points that Kotesh mentioned was the unconstrained thinking that entrepreneurs get into. In fact, I read a very interesting definition of what an entrepreneur is. They defined entrepreneurship as entrepreneur as a person who has ambitions far beyond the resources that he or she controls. So they really don't look at whether they have all the resources required for the kind of ambition that they have. They will go and get it, or they will buy it, or they will co-opt people with those resources and bring them all in. I'm just trying to tread the path carefully to cover the aspects that Anand and Kotesh didn't actually touch in great detail. They covered a lot of ground, so I'm just trying to see what's left of this particular topic. So I am relying on two sources of experience for myself to talk about this particular topic. I worked for two professionally managed companies and two entrepreneur-driven, owner-driven, promoter-driven companies in my career. And after that, for 25 years, I have been working with several owner-driven companies. So 80% of my clients in consulting are owner-driven companies. And there are a few things that strike me as very unique about them. But before I get into that, I would like to look at the life cycle of a company and what happens in the life cycle of a company. So just imagine that an entrepreneur starts a company. All companies are started by entrepreneurs with one or two people or maybe three people starting the company. Even the current day professionally managed giants were once small companies which were started in the garage. I mean, the legend has it that Hewlett and Packard was started in a garage with a capital of $500. So you know what we are talking about. The grand scale that we see today of HP is very different from how it started. And this is how almost every company starts. So when they start, it is an entrepreneur who starts the company. There is a very well-known small business expert by the name Mr. Michael Gerber, who talks about this particular phenomenon in a certain way. He says that in every organization, there are three kinds of people. I'm talking about commercial organizations. The three kinds of people that he talks about are... Hello? Hello?
Can you go back, Ravi?
Yeah? Okay.
We lost you.
Okay. So I'm referring to an expert in small business by the name Mr. Michael Gerber. Any of you who are interested in entrepreneurship might like to read this book. And here he talks about three different kinds of people who are there in organizations, particularly commercial and business organizations. One is the entrepreneur, second is the manager, and third is the technician. So we'll come from the technician side. Technician is a person who does a job. He knows the job and he does it. So example would be a chemist or an accountant or a salesman. These are all people who know their job and they can do their job. Now, managers are people who coordinate the work of several technicians to deliver a certain result. Now, what is that result? The result is what the entrepreneur set out to do. So essentially, the entrepreneur sets the goal, manager delivers the goal using the resources that are available to him. One amongst the important resources are the technicians. I'm oversimplifying, but we will come to this a little later. Now, if you see in the initial stages of a company, it is just the entrepreneur. He also doubles as the manager and perhaps even as the technician. So he does 3 roles in one. And as the company progresses, he realizes that his own time, effort, and energy are not adequate for doing all the work that needs to be done. And a typical entrepreneur is also a person who doesn't want to do it all. In fact, Michael Gerber makes a very interesting distinction. Don't work in the business. He advises entrepreneurs, don't work in the business, work on the business. So the typical distinction is, if you work in the business, you become the employee type. If you work on the business, you orchestrate the business, you create the business, you design it, you fill it with the kind of people who can deliver what you want and then ensure that they deliver what you want. So if you take this frame of reference, now as the organization progresses, there is need for systems and structures. It very quickly outgrows the systems and structures set up by the entrepreneur. Now, there are 2 aspects to this. One, many times the entrepreneur is not aware of how to set up systems and structures. This is one type of entrepreneur. There are other types of entrepreneurs who themselves possess a strong professional background and they know it. Now, my suggestion is, in both cases, they'll be better off hiring professional managers to do the setting up of the systems and structures of the company for 2 specific reasons. When the entrepreneur doesn't know enough, it obviously makes a lot of sense to hire people who do. In the other case, even when the entrepreneur knows enough about it, I still suggest that he should hire a professional manager and leave it to him, simply because of the comparative advantage. You can hire technicians, you can hire managers. You cannot hire the entrepreneur. That is a job that cannot be delegated. So there is enough of entrepreneurial responsibility to handle, and it is wise for the entrepreneur to invite professional managers to come in and set up the systems and structures and run it. There are 2 other reasons why this might be very important. I have been working for a couple of decades with the owner-driven companies. There are 2 or 3 specific mindsets that they have. And this actually militates against setting up of the systems and structures. They have, like Kotesh mentioned, they have enormous commitment, passion and energy towards their business. And many times they expect this from everybody who joins them. And that is a very tall order. You will get ordinary people. One of our bosses used to say that an organization is a place where ordinary people combine their efforts and produce extraordinary results. But if you look for extraordinary people, you cannot build your organization. And the professional manager is more acutely aware of this and more capable of handling ordinary people, stitching their efforts together and bringing out the results that the entrepreneur seeks. The other thing that I have seen with many of the entrepreneurs is because particularly when they start, they bootstrap, they have a frugal attitude towards business. And when they hire people, they find that the compensation that they seek is too high. This is a mindset change that they need to undergo. I'm not saying that they don't undergo, they do. But I'm saying it takes a lot of prodding, and a professional manager can bring about this particular change very well. So going a little deeper on this, so let's assume that the entrepreneur has already brought in a professional team and he allows them to perform. Then the company starts growing. The entrepreneur's initial focus is cash flow. And after the cash flow problems are over, he starts looking at sales and revenues. Like both Kotesh and Anand mentioned, the entrepreneur also has an ego which is different from that of just money making as an evidence of his capabilities. He also wants to be big. He wants top line. He wants turnover. He wants market share. He wants market dominance. He wants market presence. He wants people to talk about his products. He wants people to talk about his services. That is also a big part of what the entrepreneur is seeking. Many of us in our oversimplification think that entrepreneurs are only behind money. They are behind money for sure, but they're also behind several other things. And they all have to happen at the same time. Now, if this is true, then what happens afterwards? Now, if the like what Mr. Balraman mentioned in the beginning of this program, it takes 40 years for a company to become completely professional. Now, like I said, there are shades of professionalism and shades of entrepreneurship all across the spectrum. What really happens is when the company starts growing, and if the entrepreneurial group leaves or they just become shareholders, passive shareholders, then the professional group, while it keeps running the business systematically, effectively, and efficiently, they have two situations in which they can get into a lot of trouble. One is if the business that they are running loses relevance. Classic case, Kodak, extremely successful, very professional, huge market dominance. In fact, they had the technology which later on was taken over by the competitors, and they didn't launch that digital photography technology, even though they possessed it 12 years before it actually hit the market. Now, the professional managements, if they don't look at what is the next trick when my current business becomes irrelevant, that is at that stage they require another dose of entrepreneurship in order to survive. Now, this happens through two mechanisms. One, the professional company goes and acquires another entrepreneurial business and leverage the value of that business through their resources like distribution, money, management, all of that. This is something that we can see in several cases. All of you would know that Hindustan Lever acquired Indulekha. They acquire entrepreneurial companies who have a product, who have a successful track record, and then they leverage it enormously using their distribution, management, and other resources to get full benefit out of that innovation that certain entrepreneurs make. So this is one route. This is the inorganic route. And the organic route would be to build certain businesses from within. And in this, the people within the company, including the CEOs, have an interesting opportunity, which has now been christened as intrapreneurship. That is, the professional management team applies their mind and looks at an opportunity and try to implement this new opportunity without their own personal financial risk. The entrepreneur, when he began the business, promoted the company with personal financial risk. And the entrepreneurs promote the new idea within the existing company using the company's resources. Now, here again, there are several examples. 3M is a very well-known example where they encourage people to spend 20% of their time creating a new product or a new design or a new business all by themselves, which later on will be picked up by the company and implemented as a new idea. So these are ways by which the company ensures that the creative spirits available within their own employee group is leveraged to create new businesses. Now, apart from that, the other point that I mentioned earlier of the spectrum between entrepreneurship and professional management, there are a couple of other things here. Now, I will use an analogy. All analogies have a certain limitation. Nevertheless, I will use this analogy to communicate my point. I'm choosing parenting as an analogy. So most of us, when we have young children, we try to teach them at home. And when they reach the age of 3, 4, or 5, we send them to a school, and a professional teacher is going to teach them. Now, we don't let go of our entire control. We still want to know how the child performed, what was he or she taught, what should we do at home to support what is being taught at school, and things like that. So this is typical of the same kind of transition that happens even within companies. So let me extend the analogy. Now, if the child grows, after several years, when he or she gets into college, they no longer want the parental guidance. Now they're on. That's my equivalent of a professionally managed company. So if you think of this, you'll realize that there are 3 distinct formats. One format when the child is very young and you teach at home. It is like the entrepreneur doing everything and creating an idea and fostering it. At the next stage, he or she brings in some professionals and yet supervises them carefully. He or she has not left the entire control out of his or her hands. And at the third level, the company can become completely professional, which is what Mr. Balraman was mentioning as the 40-year period in which a family completely lets go of it because they don't have enough capable managers to run the business. Now, if you look at this analogy, I find there are very few fully professionally managed companies anywhere in the world. In India, if you look at it, you will have Larsen & Toubro or the branches of Unilever and companies like that, which are completely professionally driven, where the original promoter is nowhere visible. Both Mr. Larsen and Toubro have vanished, and Larsen & Toubro continues as a professionally managed company. But you will find it difficult to keep looking for examples of this. But the second kind, we have a lot of examples where the entrepreneurial group has realized that they need a professional team to run the agenda, and they can continue to set the agenda. There are several examples I can give you. Asian Paints is one, Pidilite is another, Dr. Reddy's Laboratory is another. All these companies today have the owners or directors and have a certain direct control on the agenda of the company. But it is the leveraging of the management talent is almost fully there. There is a huge professional team in each of these organizations that run the company on a day-to-day basis, and the ownership group continues to decide the agenda and guide and support the professional managers. And even the transition between one CEO to another happens almost unnoticed. Like I was reading a couple of days back that Asian Paints has inducted its 14th or 15th CEO, who's a non-family member. So there are enough examples of entrepreneur, that is oversight by the entrepreneurial group and day-to-day management left completely to the professionals. So many of these combinations today are very viable and working. There are a couple of characteristics that I've seen of entrepreneurs. One is they are extremely possessive about their company, and it has a certain kind of consequence for the CEOs. I was just trying to say, what are the key points that I have for the entrepreneurial group and for the employee managers and potential CEOs who can work with these people? For the entrepreneur, apart from what Kotesh and Anand have said, the key points that I have are, if you want to scale, you need to bring professional management. Even if you are a good manager, please stick to enterprise and bring in professional management. And the professional managers are adept at handling ordinary people, leverage their capability, and deliver the results that you want. Continue to provide guidance, support, and allow them to do their jobs. So it's a very crude statement, but I will just make it for the purpose of telling you what is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. I used to have a very friendly client with whom I could say whatever I want without being diplomatic. So in one meeting, when I found him continuously interfering with the professional that he had hired, I told him, if you have a dog, please stop barking yourself. The point I'm trying to make is, many times the entrepreneurs find it difficult to let go of the day-to-day operations of a company because they have done it many times. And I urge the entrepreneurs to let the professionals have a free hand in actually delivering the results that they themselves want. The other thing I've seen is the entrepreneurs have a penchant for bringing up new ideas very, very frequently. We have seen that organizations make a lot of profit by implementing a few ideas in a very big way, rather than having a huge number of ideas and shifting between one idea to the other. So the CEO has the responsibility of moderating the number of new ideas that are pushed into the company. There is only so much that that an organization can do, and ideas more than what the organization can handle can actually be detrimental to the organization. The other thing is, I would urge the entrepreneurs to consider paying the executives, the professional executives whom they hire very well. They have to compete with well-established professional companies to drag these people away from them and bring it into their own company. And it should be very visibly worthwhile for these professional managers to come inside your organization and help you grow and attain your ambitions. And for the employees or potential CEOs, the few points that I have are, don't expect an established organization, particularly if you are from a large established organization and you are moving as a CEO of a young, small entrepreneurial venture. Don't expect established organization where you can just go and fit in. Most of the time, you have to go and create the organization. It will be a loose bunch of people with not very clearly defined job responsibilities. And you as the professional manager have to play the role of creating the organization in a very structured manner. Like I said, the owners are very possessive and expect that they will be very possessive about it. It's their own child. They don't like surprises. So if you can have periodic meetings with the owner group and brief them on what's going on and make it very transparent, they feel much more comfortable with you. And that's one way in which you can build a relationship with them. The third point I would say is be a buffer between your team and the owners. The owners can at times be whimsical, and it might affect the team that you are trying to build. So the team must see you as an effective buffer in such cases. I'm not saying you should prevent them from meeting the owners. That is not correct. But I'm saying that they should know that at critical moments, they have your support and you will manage it for them. And in course of time, the CEOs should opt to become entrepreneurs. That is, they should spot business opportunities that can be implemented within the confines of this particular company, and new verticals can be added to this business. Now, promoter-led companies like what Anand Kripalu was mentioning, in fact, if you see, a large proportion of the value addition in this country even today is by promoter-led companies. They are promoter-led, maybe they have a large professional team, but it is still run by, still directed by the promoters. They have one big advantage over the professional CEOs. The professional CEOs are troubled by the quarter-on-quarter requirement of publishing results that are better than the previous quarter. And the promoter owners of companies have a much longer vision. They are not short-sighted at all. I have seen them taking risks which play out over several years later, and they need to be respected for it. Kotesh used a very good phrase: they are special people. Promoters and entrepreneurs are special people. So it is the responsibility of the professional management to be cohesive along with them and build corporations. Now, before I close, I have two questions which I feel that some people in the audience, people like Srikanth Sastry and Sitaram, are better equipped than me to answer. How do venture capitalists and private equity people judge whether a promoter is actually going to allow a professional CEO to enable the corporation to grow multifold? Like one of my mentors keeps saying, the job of the professional manager is to multiply the vision of the entrepreneur. Multiply the idea, multiply the result, and multiply the vision of the entrepreneur. If this has to be done, how do venture capitalists and private equity players, before they put their money, how do they judge this particular aspect? I know that they look at teams, I know they look at the validity of the idea, but how do they judge whether this owner is going to allow the freedom for the professional team to help him expand the business? With this, I close what I had to say, and I look forward to people like Srikanth Sastry and Sitaram addressing this particular question. And then I think we will be open to other questions from everybody. Thank you.
Well done, Rao. Srikanth, can you come in and comment, please?
Sita is my senior from Ponds. I'll let him go first.
Hierarchy is over.
Sita, you want to go first?
Is Sita around? Sita? Sitaram?
I don't think.
Okay. Otherwise, I can start off. So,
Yeah,
Ravi, I mean, there are two kinds of investments, right? I mean, venture capitalists tend to invest in companies where they evaluate whether one of the founders is CEO material. And therefore, they will back a team which has a great CEO, or a lot of these founders are in their 20s or 30s, and therefore they're placing a bet that this person can be a CEO. At the same time, the shareholder agreements or the investor agreements they sign provide the investor with the right to replace the management team or the CEO if that CEO doesn't shape up. And that does happen a few times. And we even have famous global examples like Uber, for example. The founder CEO turned rogue because of his management style and culture, and then they had to bring in a professional. So investors do have the right, but Sita may have a point of view on what I call as private equity investments as opposed to venture capital. Private equity investors might buy companies which are already 500 crore, 1,000 crore turnover. There, I guess the viewpoint would be different, and I suspect Sita may have a point of view there.
Yeah, Sita is there.
Yeah, very much. I was muted. Now I can speak. So Ravi is asking us to share our secret sauce, right? I mean, to put it very simply, at the stage that we invest, we're talking about where the tree is not visible. We're just seeing the seed, right? And the biggest risk that you take, or the biggest bet that you take, is really on the entrepreneur, right? Because everybody prepares business plans, stretching many years, etc. It's worth nothing. Things change, and you want an entrepreneur out there who knows how to play the ball as the game evolves, and not just be constrained by a certain, set of rules that were evolved before the game started.
Right.
So that, I think, is super important. And I think one of the things we really pay a lot of attention to is our collective assessment as a firm about the quality of the entrepreneur that we're investing behind. And it is a big judgment call. It takes into account all our past experiences, our collective intuition. What we call the smell test is finally super important. What do we assess as that person or persons' integrity, their sense of values, their commitment to not valuation, but building a business, building an institution. All of those, I think we keep listening carefully to the subtext of all the conversations that we have with them. And all of that in some manner builds an intuition around that. And we get it wrong. And when we get it wrong, I think we try to understand why we got it wrong and why we should not get it wrong again. So I think I would call it a critical business skill for us in the VC space, Ravi.
Right. So that was helpful.
Yeah. See, I want to come in here because I have been mentoring quite a few entrepreneurs. You see, you should look at the entrepreneur's own challenges, difficulties, frustrations. See, entrepreneurs tend to be very highly creative and driven people. They take risk and they want to achieve, and they have huge frustrations, and things don't measure up when their support group do not measure up. When government is not acting with a forward vision, highly restrictive practices, corruption in the industry, all these frustrate entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs do need, coaching, mentoring. They need someone to take these frustrations and handhold and motivate. So there is this requirement. I mean, today, a lot of people do professional coaching. They get professionally certified. I do not know how to work with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs need to trust these coaches. I mean, so these coaches have to be senior enough in business, and they have to have gray hair or a bald head, so that because apart from to say, how you appear to say is very important. So there is a lot to an entrepreneur. I mean, an entrepreneur makes a very difficult choice to encourage. Bring the best out of an entrepreneur is a skill and a task and an art.
Can I add another comment to? I was just thinking about all the inputs from all of you, very thought-provoking inputs. And broadly, the way the whole thing seems to be falling into is saying the entrepreneur is the hunter, finds the opportunities and lands it. Yeah. And the professional is the farmer, harvests the opportunity, maximizes the benefit of the result. Now, and in many ways, it's true. We find that over time, organizations mature, businesses mature, and the professional is better at getting value out of that maturing business. Right. But what I find truly interesting is this new breed of entrepreneurs who have developed these amazing businesses, Amazon and Facebook and everybody else. Jeff Bezos is very much in the business, right? And he's building a great organization delivering amazing value, right? And I think that's the new perhaps thing to think about, which is these amazing entrepreneurs who also seem to be able to breed this amazing professional organization which can both hunt and farm.
Right.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Amazing viewpoint, Setha.
Yeah. In fact, most of the new age tech companies, the founders stay on till they're ready to retire. Bill Gates, because he wants to do philanthropy, or some others like Jeff Bezos continue to do so. So that is certainly the more prevailing trend in the tech entrepreneur space, actually.
Right.
Can we open it to questions? And Group Captain, we can take some extra time because we do not have the IPL anymore. And this is a lot of people are very interested in this discussion.
Yes, sir. In fact, because of interest, we kept it till 7:45. So the timing itself, we have done it till 7:45. We'll try and accommodate as many questions as possible, sir. And we have got about 140 viewers watching this program live on different. And we have got a question from Mr. Santosh from Delhi. And what he wants to know is, this normally believe that entrepreneurs with no formal education in management take greater risk, while qualified management professionals are risk averse. This is attributable to a system of education which focuses on success and compromise on dealing with failures. Any one of you can take the questions.
Who wants to do this?
I will take that. Actually, these are two different people. I think the professionally educated person is actually seeking employment. He probably doesn't have entrepreneurship as one of his goals at all. So to that extent, he's not strictly comparable to an entrepreneur. And the less educated person that you are talking about, education is probably not that relevant for a person who has an idea and is obsessed with it and is willing to implement it. The other thing is the professional who has an employment in mind is a risk-averse person, and he's not strictly comparable with this entrepreneur at all. They are slightly different people, and to that extent, the education or the lack of it in the other person actually doesn't matter at all. What would others say, Anand and Kotesh?
So actually, I'm seeing it's interesting, compared to when we all did MBA, almost nobody went and started a business of their own.
Right.
Most people went into a company. They were relatively risk averse, okay to play the game with the company's money and take risks with the company's money, but not with their own. But if you see today, a large number of people passing out of even the management institutes, right, in their early years, when they're still in their 20s, are going out, 3-4 people getting together and starting something if they have an idea behind. So I think what's happening is that I think if you leave it for too long, you absolutely become risk averse because, it's too late in life to actually take those kinds of risks. You have other considerations and constraints. But in the early years now, because the world is also different, opportunities are many, technology is a platform that you can go and exploit with an idea, right? So it is suddenly an idea being something that you can, drive is now far more accessible than the brick and mortar ideas of the past. So I think there is a interesting emerging breed of people who are professionally educated, but are going into entrepreneurship. And I would love to see if many of them are able to not just be passionate about their idea, but do what all the tech company gurus are doing now. So, whether it's Tesla or they've all become 100 billion, but they're still fully in their business. As somebody said, they're not on the business. They're absolutely in the business and running it, and yet providing breakthroughs. And I'd love to see, even in India, if you're going to have this new breed of people who are management entrepreneurs, almost emerging.
Right. So just to add to it, Anand, see, one of the angles that I saw in that question was, what about the less educated people? I'm saying even the Bill Gates and Steve Jobs of the world who dropped out are actually not dropouts in the traditional sense. They chose to get out because they found that the education that they're getting is not relevant for their goals. Not that they were incapable of being educated. It is just that they chose not to get into it.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Anand, if I may add to your point, the internet entrepreneurs are too young and recent in India, but we just have to look at Infosys, where a professional team of founders set it up and stayed on to run it. And sequentially, all of them ran it actually.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
And when you think about the whole early stage business, I think almost all the companies that we invested, their founding team is highly professionally qualified, comes from the best institutes of engineering, management, etc., trained in India, overseas, could very comfortably get into a corporate role, but chosen entrepreneurship.
Right.
In fact, we are in MMA. We are promoting a women business council where we are trying to encourage women into entrepreneurship. And I plan to invite you to get into the council to suggest, support, encourage these people, because it is only through startups and entrepreneurships can India's GDP grow.
Thank you, sir. Here is a question in the chat box. You must also think it's from Mr. Venkateshwaran. He says, he said, excellent presentation. Is a feast to the intellect. Many professionals have become entrepreneurs and very successful, especially in the technology space, not so much in the manufacturing. Your views and reason for this, please. And he also further added, in the West, the original entrepreneurs keep away from the management and ownership, and the management is totally independent. This is quite widespread. When do you see such a thing happening in India?
Would you take that, Kotesh?
Okay, so the first part of it, I think it's beginning to happen. Where you see the current generation, there is a lot more entrepreneurial activity that you see. And as far as the distinction in terms of professional management is concerned, I think it is beginning to happen in a big way. It is not just the Larsen and Toubro. I mean, today the Mahindra Group, for example, the entire, all businesses are run by professionals almost. And that's beginning to happen and spreading to various other industries.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Another question from our, again, Facebook, sir. Should the founder continue with the entrepreneurial management, or it is time to engage professional managers so that founder can devote more time to the company's core ideas? I think you brought up quite a bit in your presentation. Would you like to add on this point, sir?
I mean, maybe I'll just take a shot at it. I think that, well, yes, from whatever I have seen, right? I think the founder should try and make sure that the founder's mentality stays, one, with himself, and secondly, that there is a microcosm within the company that can replicate some of the ideas that made that company what it is, right? And relegate actually exploiting past ideas and creating scale and big business impact to professional managers. I think there is a real opportunity to make 1 + 1 = 11. If that happens, you have to make sure that egos and other things don't come in the way, and you learn and be self-aware enough to know what you are good at and what you are not good at, right? But because some people have such a big ego, they think they're good at everything. And I think being self-aware, right, I think is really, really important. And those who are self-aware, I think, create this magic combination the best. Those who are not destroy their corporations.
Well said, Anand.
Thank you, sir. Here's a question from Mr. Santosh from Nagpur. He wants to know how owners and professional CEOs can get along well. What are the right set of actions that the professional CEO should take when entering in a business where the founder is very much alive and doing extremely well?
Well, in a lighter vein, they'll get along well if they spend an evening over one of my brands.
Very true.
You have McDowell brands, of course. Yes, sir. Yes, got it. There's another interesting question which has come on social entrepreneurship. They want to know that social entrepreneurship has been growing all over the world. Do you believe the leaders of social enterprises need the same attributes and skills as entrepreneurs in the conventional businesses? If not, how do you think the social entrepreneurship should think and act differently than other entrepreneurial leaders? Today, for a country like India, we need more social entrepreneurs so that the growth is as much what is expected.
I think as far as results are concerned, social entrepreneurship and for-profit entrepreneurship are pretty similar, excepting for the priorities of the goals. Now, if I run a charity hospital, maybe my goal would be to serve as many people as possible, subject to no loss as the condition. So here again, we all need to emphasize efficiencies. And that is the professional manager's role. So pretty much they are similar, excepting that the priorities of the goals are slightly different between social entrepreneurship and for-profit entrepreneurship. Anand and Kotesh, you have a different view?
Yeah, I would like to add one point. Many professionals not only seek, they seek recognition in addition to, remuneration or whatever you call rest of it. So therefore, from that perspective, a social entrepreneur would require somebody who's got deep passion for that cause. And it's not so easy to, hire professional managers into such an organization. That would be a constraint for the socially oriented ventures.
Great, sir. It's a question again from chat box. Mr. Iqbal want to know, sir, whether the professional or entrepreneurial, what is the yardstick for success? Is it growth or profit or benefits to the society at large? The benefits that has been reached people below the poverty line. What is the measurement yardstick for measuring the success under these circumstances?
Well, I suppose it's the idea with which the entrepreneur has, initiated whatever that model is, right? Now, I think at the end of the day, none of these can survive without some reasonable financial metrics over time. They can't be just guzzlers of cash, right? Then you will not achieve any objective at all. So at some stage, there has to be some sense of financial discipline and financial success that needs to come. But in many cases, that is only a means. The end is really the business idea or the objective with which the entrepreneur initiated that entire movement, right? And whatever be that cause. And many entrepreneurs actually have a bigger vision in their mind. I don't think they chase P&L and deliver that. They chase the idea and deliver P&L as a means to an end. The end is much bigger than just the P&L. Right? I think that's why it drives them with a level of passion. Money alone can never be a passion. After you've got your first crore, then the next 100 crores, the next billion, the next 100 billion cannot be the driver, right? It's an outcome.
You would like to add, sir? Otherwise, I'll take two last questions before we close. Anybody would like to add any more, sir? Can I go to the next question?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. It is a question from a B school from Mumbai. You want to know, sir, do you think that if a promoter wants to run a company, he or she should be the CEO? Data shows that promoter-led firms grew faster than the professionally led ones since 2013. What do you think the primary reason behind this?
No, the promoter-led companies definitely do well. There is no problem about that. But it is about scale and size. At what point does it exceed the capability of one promoter to run the entire company and also to drive growth? And he might have other creative ideas which he may put in back burner if he doesn't develop a professional team. Our plea is that the entrepreneur, the promoter are very important people. And I like the phrase that Kotesh used, they are special people. And I feel that they should not do the mundane job. Mundane meaning multiplying the value of the original idea. If they have more original ideas, probably they should expand into several companies rather than manage one company.
Thank you, sir. Anybody like to add anything more, sir, before I ask the last question? Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Prasad.
I would like to add one point. If you look at India's market cap, a large part of this market cap actually belongs to the promoters.
Yeah.
Among the listed companies.
Right.
They may not be running directly. Several of the companies are being run by professional managers, professional CEOs, professional boards also. But if you really look at the ownership, a large part of it is still retained by the promoter groups.
Excellent, sir. Last question for this evening, sir. How do you think promoters-led businesses address fraud, misconduct, and non-compliance? Sometimes they put it under the carpet. We also want to know, do you think employees in a promoter-led organizations more driven and loyal? If yes, why do you think so? Anand covered this very beautifully. Yes, sir, what do you...
No, I'll just say that, it is okay to not have principles of doing business in a very early stage when you are small. But you will never translate your business to an institution with scale that will live on after you if you don't embed the right governing principles of doing business, the right values. You have seen the biggest institutions in the world crumble, right, on their knees because they have somewhere let go of values and let personal gain and personal reward influence the values of the enterprise, right? So I just think that, at the early stage, you might find it easy cutting corners, doing small things, and maybe it works and nobody cares about you because you're so small anyway and you can't make a difference. But there is no way you can get to the holy grail of building an institution, right? If that is your objective, right? Of creating a business that you started, which becomes an institution and lives on after you, if it is not embedded with the right values and principles. That's my view.
Anybody like to add, sir? Otherwise, thank you so much, gentlemen. A fascinating evening. Before I will request Mr. Balraman to pass the closing remarks. As a token of our appreciation, as usual, we would like to present mask, which is a really, really needy thing today. On your behalf, we are till the serum comes, I think this is the only way of protecting ourselves. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you so much. And now I'll request Mr. Balraman to please share your closing remarks. Over to you, Mr. Balraman.
Yeah, fascinating evening. Thank you, Anand, Raghav, and Koteshwar, Srikanth, and Sitaram, and Shakka, who is somewhere around. See, this is an unending and evolving question. There are three different characteristics that business requires: entrepreneurship, leadership, and managership. We have Indian Institute of Management, we have Madras Management Association, All India Management Association. We do not have Indian Institute of Entrepreneurship yet, Indian Institute of Leadership yet. But I have seen entrepreneurs are very natural leaders because they know exactly where they want to go. And they know they depend on other people. So they need to inspire, they need to accommodate views, they need to listen. They struggle in learning these skills, but they do. Mere managership only brings in efficiency. So I think in terms of our own education, training, we need to look at both entrepreneurship and leadership in addition to managership, is my view. And this is what I would like to do with MMA as well. And I do need your support. Thank you for a superlative evening.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much, sir. I'll request the people to share the feedback. It's very valuable to us. Thank you so much. Till we meet again. Bye-bye. And block your diary. Some outstanding events are coming up. We're also bringing in some outstanding initiatives which we'll be sharing with you soon. And please do read our Business Mandate magazine, digital, especially brought to you, and keep sharing it with a large number of people, because our objective of MMA is to propagate management movement in this part of the country. We would like to reach everyone, and we call it in our terms management for the masses, which we are doing. Thanks to Mr. Balraman for really driving us, bring the best in us, and thanks. Now we know the potential of MMA to reach what level we can reach, and which we are trying to do that. Thanks, Mr. Raghavendra. As usual, you've been fantastic, and Mr. Prasad and Mr. Anand Kripalu. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, and I'll walk to miles to listen to you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Balraman, once again, and stay safe, stay healthy. We'll meet again. Bye-bye, and good night, sir.
Superlative. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Still in Bangalore?
Yes. We'll catch up.
I left it because some more people take some more time to give the feedback. So we'll let it down. Because the feedback is always interesting, sir. Yes. Yeah. Lovely, fascinating evening, sir. Yes. I personally experienced it tremendously in the MMA, because every alternate year I get one professional CEO, one owner CEO, who is my president actually. So I distinctly see the differences between the owner manager as a president and the CEO of run a company. It's totally, so we could really do extremely well because of the balance between the owner manager